はい。じゃあ、それでは、芸術総合講座5をスタートしたいと思います。本日は、ヤン・タルナスさんをお迎えして、大成さん、アドバイザー
Thank
で。
you for coming.
Thank you for coming.
Thanks for having me.
いや
OK。
ぜひスタートしていきたいと思います。先にヤン・タルナスさんの紹介を先にさせていただき
はい。
ますと、えウジャドスフスキー城現代美術センター、ポーランドにあります、そちらで勤務されています、ヤン・タルナスさんです。学芸員、美術史家、文芸批評家、哲学者として活躍されて、おります傍ら、芸術雑誌の、えーオオビーグ、オビーグかな
Yeah,
オビーグ、
yeah,
オビー
object.
グの
Yeah.
編集者
Object。うん。
でもあります。大学の博士課程で、存在論や芸術哲学などを研究されていて、本日はポーランドの芸術とアートマニフェストについてお話しいただこうと思っております。はい。じゃあ、大成さんよろしくお願いします。
はい。はい、よろしくお願いします。大成です。ですね、今日はヤンタルナさんをお招きして講義をしていただくことにしましたと。で、Art in Poland and Polishness Manifesting Art ということで、そのポーランド人生っていうところについてお話ししていただくとともに、そこと芸術との関わりっていうことをお話ししていただこうと思います。それでですね、ポーランドというと、例えば20世紀のね、いろんな大変だった、辛かったことなどが結構みんなに注目されていると思いますけれども、それよりもっと以前のその19世紀以前のレベルのですね、ところの話をいろいろヤンさんにお伺いしたいと思ってます。ですので、もう本当に哲学、美術史をされている方ですし、皆様にもポーランドのね、その20世紀よりもっと前のところっていうのは結構難しいところかもしれませんけれども、だからこそすごく勉強する価値があるし、なかなか日本の教科書やウェブでも載ってなさそうな、本当に僕たちが知らない情報がたくさんあります。それを今回ね、美術館の学芸員のヤンさんに直接教えていただけるなっていうのはすごく感謝しております。ですので、今回は、ちょっと難しい、大変な感じかもしれませんが、ぜひ僕は楽しみにしておりますので、よろしくお願いします。Okay, Mr. Tarnas, thank you for coming here.
Thanks again for having me.
All right, so please go ahead for the lecture.
All right, so I've chosen that specific title for the lecture, Art in Poland and Polishness Manifested in Art. And when I was asked to present this lecture, I wrote a short introduction to that lecture, and I will reread it and explain myself why I want to approach this lecture in this specific manner. So the idea is to explain the artistic specificity of Polish art in particular and how it differs from the generally available information about Western art. To someone who has grown outside of Western culture tradition, obviously. And I want to propose a survey lecture on the history of art in Poland from the perspective of philosophy of art and art theory. In effect, it would be a lecture on art from the perspective of the history of ideas. That is how art has been viewed in the tradition of Western civilization over the past millennia and how it differs in Poland due to historical events that gave rise to Polish art. So, in the result, the listener of such a lecture should acquire the ability to confront the perspective of Western art on his or her own against the rigid and untrue information disseminated by guidebooks, inept experts, and fake internet postings. Moreover, it would introduce the listener to the reality of art in Poland to such an extent that he or she would be able to consciously approach questions and the search for deeper meaning in Polish art, both in the context of possible visit to Poland and in relation to the monuments of Polish art collected in the world's museum. So I've decided to present this lecture in such a manner because I do believe that doing a presentation about many instances of Polish art wouldn't, scratch the tip of the iceberg of what Polish art is and was through the centuries and the millennia. And I do believe that providing the knowledge to gain the ability to understand what's beneath the artwork, and the artwork not only considering Polish craftsmanship, but all the instances of art objects in the Western civilization tradition, is far more interesting from the perspective of the student, especially the one who grown and lives outside of this civilization tradition and circle and influence. And the lecture I want to present to you today will be divided, let's say, into 6 chapters. And I will mainly divide these chapters into 2 consequent lessons, let's say so. First one will be regarding the concept of art, as art is, I believe, differently understood in the Western civilization than in the other cultural spheres. And the second one, obviously, will be the implementation of that knowledge on how to understand Polish art in the sphere of concepts presented previously as how to understand art in the West. So art in the West is rather specifically philosophical concept, which was created millennia ago, and it differs from the way we approach art today. And that is the problem, that most of viewers, artists, even art theoreticians and art historians have absolutely no idea nowadays. And the question is why, and who benefits from this. So in order to understand Western art, that is the art of Europe, of course, and all areas under its cultural influence, it is necessary to understand that art in this circle was the result of views, ideological currents, and values, of course, which nurtured in Western societies and contributed to the formation of Western civilization. Understood in this way, art is a product of the ideas of civilization and not simply material product according to the modernist manifesto we nowadays know as art created just for the art's sake. And if we look at art in this way, it turns out to be a space that encodes certain informational and idea functions, while at the same time fulfilling certain social functions, such as, for example, the parental function that contributes to the non-verbal education of subsequent generations. Interestingly, the use of art is not the result of some modern artistic theory, but comes from the practice of art making itself, and seems to coincide with the prehistoric and therefore intrinsic human need to communicate content through an artist medium. And the example I absolutely love to present in this moment is the example of the paintings created in the Lascaux cave. So the prehistoric artworks created through the period of at least 1,000 years by many, let's call them artists, in quote, and they were contributed to create these magnificent images of animals, accompanied by very schematic images of human. So that indicates the fact that there was a presence of a complex context. We may absolutely not be able to encode the information, how they perceived themselves to the surroundings, to the surrounding world, the animals themselves, but we can find out that there were a deeper understanding of the information, maybe the idea, maybe it was some sort of a sacred function, or maybe they were just overwhelmed by the creation surrounding them. But art was, for them at least, a way to communicate something way deeper than just describing the world around them. If it wasn't so, the question would indicate that they should focus on what was the most interesting subject to them, which obviously for human in all the human history is the human itself. That proves the art is a way of communicating something way way deeper, and it belongs to the intrinsic human nature itself. So the concept of art to which we are accustomed today, the English art word, which I will be using throughout the entire lecture, does not mean the same art concept as it used throughout the history. And it's worth being aware of that. And it is really important regarding the art created in the Western civilization. So at the very beginning of that theoretical dispute on art, the Greeks introduced the concept of art into theory under the term of techne. And techne specifically means a permanent disposition to create on the basis of sound reasoning. And that term was used to describe many instances of creation, not only art, but it was the term was to underline the ability to create a thing in a proper manner. So the shoemaker was creating, as technical term suggests, shoes which were adequate for wearing. They were, comfortable, they were very useful, they were long-lasting, and so on. And the artist, let's say a sculptor, was creating a sculpture in a way it was meant to be. So there were functions but will underline in the theme of techne, it has to be done in a way that it will be viewed by viewers in a certain way. So there was that idea that art is not just a manifestation of inner imaginary of the artist, as we would say nowadays, but it was meant mainly for the viewers, and for the viewers, it has to be in a certain manner. And a few centuries after that, in the Middle Ages, the concept of art was transformed from techne to a Latin term ars, and there are many different definitions of how ars should be understood. But the most adequate, I believe, is the definition by St. Thomas Aquinas, in Latin, ars et recta ratio factibilum. So roughly speaking, art is the principle of the correct production of what is intended by the mind of the creator himself, right? So art in this view was elevated to the status of a virtue, understood as the constant ability to produce the inventions of human mind. So in this way, the function of conveying information in art was emphasized. So in the Middle Ages, they focused on art as a medium to present ideas and not only information. And I will explain that subtle difference about what an idea and what information is in a minute. But to conclude that beginning, the modern term art, which was introduced in the modern times, is completely changed the framing of what we understand as art. And nowadays, art was shifted, but that concept of art, that framing was shifted from efficiency in favor to an object. So nowadays, we don't ask question, at least, of course, in modern Western tradition, what art means, what art tries to convince the viewer of, and we are asking what art is regarding which object is an art and why we should claim this object as an art. And most modern theories regarding art and why we should acclaim one object as an art and another not is, for example, the institutional theory of art, according to which all objects presented, exhibited in the monument, in the museums and the galleries are art objects because they are in the art institutions. So that way of thinking led to creating a being, so to say, named the art world. So there's this whole theoretical concept of deep state society or deep state elites consisted of art theorists, art historians, especially curators, and of course the people who pay for art and invest in art to decide what art is and what art is not. And it was the moment when art historians were stripped of the ability to define an art object because they were not needed to explain what art is about and what art wants to convey to the viewer. But the artwork became something like money. So they were a deep state group of elites trying to use art to re-educate societies and next generation with solely ability to point out what art is and what art is not. And we'll get back to that point at the end of the lecture if we will have time and energy for that. So to put that into perspective, we may present this concept of how to understand art in such a scheme that art objects used to be a sum of informational function presented in art, idea function presented in an art object, and the aesthetic medium. So basically, an art object was being, physical being, created in such an aesthetic manner that it would present in a very useful way to the viewer both the information function and the idea function. And that's the sole core of an art object in the Western tradition to the modern / contemporary times. And that's a useful scheme to understand art regarding if you are dealing with an ancient art, the medieval art, the even the the Renaissance art, Baroque art, and classical, and even the Romantic art period. The problem begins with modern times. And one could ask, what about the sacral function of art, the paranetic functions of the ability of art to educate next generation and groups of people? Of course, the exhibitional function of art, the monetizational function of art, so the investment function, and so on. And I wouldn't argue that they are not in the art object, but I would say if they are not necessary for an art object to be an art object. But if they are in an art object, they are just subsequent. They are less important than these three bolded in the beginning. And to put this rather complicated art, perhaps maybe even philosophical ontological theory of art into the concrete perspective, I've chosen an example of medieval art in Poland. This is the tomb and sarcophagus of Henry IV the Probus, created in the beginning of the 14th century, and a little bit of historical background. So the period in which tombstone was created is the period of rule by the Piast dynasty in Poland. So we are dealing with a time between the 10th and 14th century. And this is the first major stage of the history of Polish state. Specifically, in that period of time, we want to address and refer to, we are concerned with the will of Bolesław III Rymov, which was at the time the king of Poland. And in that will, he divided the country in a limited sense among four of his sons. He wanted to avoid that situation when all of the sons of the previous kings of Poland were fighting one another and killing one another to gain the solely rule and majority over the country. And because of that, he thought of the idea that if he can, depart the country into several duchies among all of his sons, they could live peacefully, and one of them would be the senior over the rest. The problem became more complicated within the next generation, because every single duchy with its own ruler had, let's say, 5 to 6 sons of his own, and he was departing all of his duchy amongst his sons. So the country of Poland for the nearly 4th century was just total sum of many duchies among them. And at one point in history, there was that idea that they all must be unified into a sole country again. And we are looking at the first instance of this idea presented in this tombstone. Because naturally, regarding the art aesthetics, we see it's nice sculpture. It was colorful, which you can see from the reconstructions of the colors used in the stone at the beginning, in the original version of this monument. But if you regard the information, you ask, what do you see? And you see in chronographically a duchy of Silesia, a knight, with his sword and his shield. And you see that he's holding his sword with a firm grip, as well as you can see that his legs are active. So you can pose a question, if he is already dead, that should be obvious because he's laying on his tomb upon sarcophagus. So is he awaiting a judgment in Christian terms, or is he already in the heavens?
Okay.
And that's why he's smiling, because he served so well during his lifetime that he gained the ability to enter heavens. That's the ideological concept regarding the idea of being given the ability to enter the heavens in Christian religion and regarding that time. But more importantly, you can connect this information about his virtuous life as a knight in the medieval times with the coats of arms you can see on both sides of his head. And these are not coats of arms of his duchy. These are coats of arms of the Kingdom of Poland. So the idea information presented in this sculpture is saying that a good and noble ruler is the one who actively persuades the dream of unifying all the duchies of Poland to a single nation. And that subtle difference, which you cannot acquire looking at the term information and idea, is the difference about describing a dead knight lying on a sarcophagus, and of course the priests surrounding the sarcophagus, conducting the dead prince to the cemetery, and all the witnesses who attended the funeral, all the criers who went to express their sorrows after the death of the Grand Duchy, to the idea and the concept which was communicated with very specific historical, political, and philosophical background to the viewers at the time. And this is the way we should approach art of old masters, so to say, or at least art from the ancient to modern times. And case is, nowadays, even art historians and art theorists are turning away from this perspective to put old art in the terms of the art presented nowadays, which absolutely devastates the old masters' art, as we are dropping this unique context and information presented in that art, solely the idea what was that art created for. So doing this, how we should look upon the art of the past times, we should ask what was the essence of the culture of the West. And to answer that question, one should know that the Western civilization was founded on three pillars, so to say: the Greek philosophy, so how do we use our rational thought; the Roman law, so how do we organize our society into the rule of law; and Christian morality, so how do we act in society and for ourselves, so we can say that we acted in the good manner. And that Christian factor in the age of widespread secularization we live nowadays is really often overlooked, because Christianity not only introduced a new moral system in the ancient times, reorganizing society around the principle of the equality of all individuals, but also created an entirely new perspective on worldly life. Christians did not see themselves as autonomous, unassimilated social groups, but as a people who lived in a way of life that was consistent with their everyday life. So it did not matter whether they were Romans, Franks, or Slavs. They behaved just as indicated by the local traditions they were found in. But what changed was the introduction of the perspective of eternal life and the conscious talking of actions on the way to earning eternal life. And this is the way we should approach the art, especially in the ancient and modern times regarding the Christianization of Europe, because we see these art objects which are similar in the way of presenting the same theological concept or religion concepts, but they are just different because of the tradition they were created in. But that's simple distinction between the way of creating, so the aesthetic modus of the art and the idea and information content of the artworks, which was almost similar in the whole Europe at the time for centuries. So the art that arose under the auspices of Christian morality did not so much depict the need to reorganize lifestyles as it did depict in its iconography complex concepts and values according to which a morally virtuous life should be lived. So Christianity therefore did not develop its own independent art, but inscribed meanings, concepts, and values into the developing artistic tradition. And that's another thing you have to consider regarding the art in Europe, that if the main point of art created was to present meanings, concepts, and values which were developed on the Christian background, you have to understand that Christianity never intended to create the art, the way of presenting art. So we would say not even the aesthetics, but the core of presentation of art. Christianity was never interested in this thing. So the development of art in Europe from ancient times to medieval times, from medieval to Renaissance, from Renaissance to Baroque, and so on, is purely artistic. But what's more interesting is the case of the changes in the concepts presented in this art. Because if you want to, just take apart the Gothic art and the Renaissance art and the Baroque palazzo, let's say, for example, you will find that all the elements of which that art was created have already been created in the past times. So all the total sum of creation in the ancient times and in the medieval times, so all the columns, all the arches, all the detailings, all the concepts for stained glass windows, and so on, were created as a formal aspects, let's say, till the end of the medieval period time. And afterwards, the Renaissance, Baroque, the Enlightenment period, the Romantic period, only used these formal aspects regarding the art presentation in different manner. So nothing really was invented on that basis, but what was changing rather drastically was the meanings, concepts, and values, and that is the true face of arts throughout the centuries. And the core of that problem is the changes in the aesthetic tradition, because the basis for aesthetic tradition, and that's so the question, what was giving the rise to certain meanings, concepts, and values, is the aesthetic theory that was created on the Christian background regarding three concepts: so truth, goodness, and beauty. And of course, somehow it was connotated with the concept of the God in the Catholic tradition of theology, which had to be true, which had to be good to create earth as it was seen, and had to be the absolute beauty to explain his truth and goodness. But in the art, these concepts were trying to exemplify the entire art structure as the world itself, because the concept of truth was understood as the total sum of goodness and beauty. So what was good and beautiful had to be true. And on the other hand, what was good had to be true and beautiful. So everything that was true and beautiful was good. And beauty was the total sum of truth and goodness. And that explains why they put so much effort to create as good art as they were possibly able at the moment, because they believe that beauty is the total sum of what is good and what is true. And regarding the concept of God in Catholic theology, if something was to exemplify the either the Jesus Christ story on earth or the God concept in churches, so on, had to be put in such a way, manner, and effort that we had to proceed with that art creation progress, presenting it far better than our everyday life. So all the gold we could acquire, all the jewels we could acquire, all the best craftsmen we could acquire were put in the project to be certain that we tried to recreate the beauty as well as we were able at the moment. At least that's a theory how it worked in the past millennia. So that's the key to understand the aesthetics and the nature of meanings, concepts, and values in Western art throughout the centuries. And really, what's difference the Western art from the art in Poland, and that's the place when we switched our the second part of this lecture, so the question about Poland art and Polishness in art, is the historical concept. Because regarding art in Europe, everything was based to the moment, let's say, in the Enlightenment period. So the end of the 18th century. On the West, that was the case of the French Revolution. In Poland, it was the case of partitions of Poland that changed that basis. But till that moment, everything was based in Catholicism, and what different was the historical situation of the nation on which the artist grew and evolved and pursue their artistic abilities throughout the centuries. So the case of Poland, almost everything that regards Polish history can be, or at least can be to a certain extent explained from its geopolitical situation, because Poland lies almost in the center of Europe. But speaking ideologically, the Poland is the gateway between the East. So we are talking, of course, Russia, nowadays Ukraine, but Ottoman Empire in the past, and a gateway to Asian cultures. And on the other hand, to the Western Christian world, as it used to be Christian at least. So being a gateway between East and the West, Poland was on the one hand endangered in numerous wars that have taken place on the territory of Poland. That is important to understand throughout the centuries, which of course directly impacted the artistic royalty of the country. And on the other hand, it was a place where many cultures and traditions have met and merged within the country. And when you think about Poland as that place of constant wars and constant cultures meeting, you can exemplify three instances which were crucial to identify the themes, the subjects, and the problems presented in Polish art. And I would say personally, that's my theory, that it's Christianity, the case of culture unification or the certain values and virtues, and the problem of national identity and struggles for sovereignty. And we will approach all these three instances in an order. So the case of Christianity. The case of Christianity in Poland is the case that Polish state, which was formed from the tribes to sole nation somewhere in the beginning of the 10th century by the acceptance of baptism by the ruler of the time. And of course, that was the moment when Poland as a country was invited to that whole society of Christian countries in the Western world. And although the process of Christianization was not immediate, and the national identity of the Poles coincided very strongly with Catholicism, and that stayed that main cultural axis of the Polish culture and the Christian beliefs reflected on the form of the life cultivated in Polish society at least until the 20th century. And maybe we could say that was the main axis of how do you understand Poles? Well, they're obviously Catholics, and that was the main how to look and understand Polish society maybe till 1960s, 1970s. And as a result of such an understanding, one of the most common architectural developments throughout history is the Church of Poland, obviously. So from the early Romanesque period to contemporary modernism, they are not only sacred spaces, but also spaces of art, often containing works of art that are far more significant in artistic and qualitative terms than what we can find in museums and art galleries. And obviously, the most striking manifestations are architectural and pictorial works, but some can say, but some can say, same can be said about sculptures, goldsmithing objects, applied arts, and even the military. And why this case of Christianity is important, remembering what I said about Poland being in the constant stage of war and military activities in its area. Because most of the times when military conflict happened, the only thing that was left unburned, unrobbed, and undestructed was the sacred places. So nowadays, visiting Poland, especially the old exhibits, the old architecture buildings, what you can find in the best conditions nowadays are Gothic churches, the Baroque churches, even the churches building through the Renaissance period, and so on. And because these were the places which were not distracted, at least not entirely at the time of war conflicts and so on, the insides of these places are filled not only with the purest style of the epoch, like paintings, goldsmithing, blacksmithing objects, polychromies, sculptures, and so on from the time of the origins of the main architectural concept of the building, but with the objects from the Gothic times to, let's say, the end of a Romantic period. So whenever you're entering a church in Poland, and the Wawel Castle Cathedral, which you can see in front of you, is a great example, because not only the building itself was under construction for several hundred years. So looking at it, you can, see the main concept of the Gothic church and its two towers, which were later on rebuilt in the Baroque era, and all the chapels which were built next to it in the period of next 200 to 300 years, as an example of an object that was under recreation for several hundred years. The same deals with every art object inside it. So while visiting Poland, the best option to confront history and all the masters is usually through the churches, which were not affected by the military campaigns which undertook Poland. And to give you the broad idea how many campaigns Poland was engaged in on its own territory, I will give you the fact that nowadays for the first time in the Polish history, so let's say from 966 till 2024, first time in the history, we have a third generation in a row which was not forced to fight for its freedom and sovereignty. So for over 1,000 years, we're in a constant state of battle. So regarding the artistic reality, almost like in 20, 30 years or so, most of what was built was demolished and had to be rebuilt once again. But Poland was a country of great importance at the time of the great styles and the beginning of great styles on the West. Because Poland, not many Poles know about these things nowadays, even. That's really a shame, and it should be pointed out in the courses of history and the humanities agenda at the universities. But Poland was the place which was the first one after the Florence to gain Renaissance artists and Renaissance art. And same was the case of the Baroque art. So we were the first nation, when we are learning about the great birthplaces of art on the West, we are of course referring to Italy, and that Florence created Renaissance, Rome created Baroque, and so on. But really, just after that art was started to flourish in Florence, and in the case of Baroque in Rome, these artists were being brought by the king, the noblemen of Poland, to start influencing these art styles in Poland. And we cannot see as many objects as we would nowadays, mainly because most of them were destroyed, most of them, unfortunately, during the Second World War. So relatively not long ago, because in the years 1939, 1945, of course. But Poland was a country filled with art objects, at least on the same class, if not better, as Italy, France, Germany, and so on. And very few people point to that problem. What was left in Poland mainly are great examples of architecture, sculpture, and paintings which were placed in churches. And inside of these buildings look something like this Corpus Christi Church, again in Krakow, where you can find that absolutely amazing pure Gothic style built from white stone, similar to the great Gothic cathedrals you can find in Saint-Denis in France, like Saint-Denis Cathedral or Chartres Cathedral or Rheims Cathedral and so on, filled with Baroque altars, and the main altar covered purely entirely from gold from the Baroque time. Examples of late Baroque and even the beginning of the Classicist period sculptures and so on in one architectural instance. So case of understanding history in Poland is the case of dividing the singular space into few millennia of art creation. But Poland not only was gaining all of the novelties of the art created in the West rather quickly, quicker than other countries in the West, but it was absolutely a masterclass of bringing novelty into the artwork. And to name a few such things, I've chosen very specific art objects from the Baroque period, which is set entitled coffin portraits. And if you can recall the paintings from the 4th century from the Egypt called the Fayum portraits, you might remember the portraits which were created on the wooden desks, presenting the faces of the dead people, created in so many painting spheres one on another, that when they were placed in a house near the place where the fireplace was located, the light from the fireplace was lighting the eyes of the pictures on the faces of the depicted dead in a house, as so to create an impression that they were brought back from the dead to reality once again. And Poles thought about a similar concept in the so-called Sarmatian period in the modern times. So it's, let's say, it's a period of time at the end of the Renaissance time to the beginning of the Romantic period. So it lasted for 300 years. And they were creating these coffin portraits alongside with the coffin altars upon which the coffin of the dead man was presented to the public. And after the Catholic ceremony of a burial, all the things from that altar upon which the coffin was placed were burned down to the ground and non-existed. But what was left were these coffin portraits painted on the metal. I believe it was iron or tin or something like that, because they were really, really thin. And they were brought back to the home place of the family of the dead person to be hung on the wall as the concept of the prolongating presence of your ancestor to whom you were referring in orders for guidance and protection and regarding prayers on every day for his or hers possibility to enter the heavens and the eternal life as a way of forgiving his sins or his or her sins conducted through his or her life. So there are a few weird concepts created in Polish art throughout the centuries.
It's kind of God. It's kind of God that this person who passed away gonna be raised as the level of the God or something.
It's more like we were praying for that person depicted on the portrait, so he may be accepted by the God to enter the heavens. We're praying to God to forgive his sins, but we're also asking him if he was a nobleman at a lifetime, and we were believing that he was already welcomed in heavens, so he could, have a word for us living still on the earth to God, so we could acquire the God's protection over us, and more things like that. But it was absolutely unique just for Poland's Sarmatian time. But that was an example of the concept of art created by the Poles. This one is the example of art craftsmanship, which is absolutely unique to the world. Because this is the St. Kinga's Chapel in Wieliczka, salt mine, exactly 101 meters below the Earth's surface, created entirely by the hand of the miners, the salt miners, without a single artist involved in this project. And it is one of the, I believe, 15 or 20 chapels created in the entire salt mine, which was active since the end of the 13th century and was closed in the late 50s and the 20th century, and it is entirely created from salt. It is one of the main attractions regarding the Małopolska Voivodeship region, because Wieliczka is located near Krakow, but we have such outstanding instances of really weird art objects or art locations, let's say so, created from not obviously intended materials, like so. And moving to the second thing of the Polish traditions, so let's say these were the instances of the Christian influence of how you do create other objects or art tendencies or traditions in Poland, but a case of unifying function of the culture in Poland. So Poland is an area where always lived many social groups of different origin. They were never only Poles in the area of Kingdom of Poland throughout the centuries. So we had Poles, we had Jews, we had Germans, we had the the Turkish, we had the Arabs, we had the Russians, we had the Prussians, and I think you could list at least 2 dozens of the non-native groups of people living on the territory of Poland. So the question was how the tradition of those people or of these groups or the tradition they grew up in, or which they brought from their countries of origin to Poland, influenced the main culture in Poland. And in Poland was happening something absolutely extraordinary in comparison to other countries in the West, because the culture of Poland was never in conflict with the other cultural traditions on its territory. There is something absolutely unique in the scale of history of the Western world, because the Polish culture was so powerful, but not aggressively, but so powerful is in its dominance over other cultures, that all the social groups of people living on the territory of Poland were softly becoming influenced by that culture in the way that the culture of Poles was taking away the important and really interesting aspects of our culture, merging it into its own tradition, and softly assimilating all those social groups so they could identify as Poles living in Poland. And that was the case, for example, of the Turkish people who lived in Poland for a period of 300 years, let's say. And at the very end of that 300 years, they felt so comfortable living in Poland and other Polish culture, they started to identifying themselves as Poles, even if they were not Christians per se, which was the main thing to be identified as a Pole, because Poland was never a country where other religions or religious traditions were persuaded forcefully to be baptized. It was the only country in the West where you weren't forced to change your religious or sacred beliefs, which is very important regarding all those stories you heard about, how the Catholic Church was forcing women, men, and children to be baptized or to be killed. And in Poland, that was not the case. So the example of that unification is the Chapel of the Holy Trinity, which is also the example of how on the Polish area, the cultures of Western and Eastern traditions merge. So this is the chapel built by Casimir the Great, the last king of the Piast dynasty, who died without son, in the Gothic architectural style. And his successor was Władysław Jagiełło, who was the king of the Great Duchy of Lithuania, not the king. He was elected the king of Poland by the nobleman of the Małopolska voivodeship at the time. And he was elected in this place, in the Chapel of the Holy Trinity in Lublin, which is also the last example, standing example of the Polish, of the Lublin Castle. And he sponsored the polychromies you are looking upon on this picture. And they are depicting three things in a very specific manner, because they are depicting the story of Christ and Mary in a theological way. It was presented on the West, but in an artistic way, which was specific to the Orthodox Church. So we are dealing with the Russian Orthodox Church tradition depicting the Western theology. And this combination of Western theology and Eastern art tradition, because the second subject presented in this sphere is the theme of the angels and heavenly thrones presented on the upper ceiling of the chapel. And thirdly is the donor's theme presenting the Władysław Jagiełło himself in this chapel in the three instances, is so unique that you can name only 10 places in the world when the Eastern Orthodox art tradition merged with the Western Catholic theology in art objects. And it happens to be that all 10 places were in Poland. And from all those instances, this one is the only one that in its whole glory remained till the 21st century. So it is absolutely unique combination of cultures, an example of how cultures were merging in Poland throughout the centuries. You can see nowadays. Another example would be the example not from art, but from the cultural life itself. So Vilna and Lviv were the cities of Poland. Nowadays, Lviv lies, of course, at the territory of Ukraine, and Vilna lies on the territory of Lithuania. But in both instances, the Polish culture was so powerful that regarding the Rus society in Lviv and the Lithuanian society in Vilna, Polish culture was naturally chosen to be the main language and culture and the background for the humanities taught at the universities in both of those cities in the 16th century and so on, that it contributed to the usage of the Polish language both in Vilna and Lviv to the extent that not only cultural life, the poetry, the literature, the rule of law, but even the graveyards were written only in Polish regarding the Polish grammar, Polish vocabulary, and so on for the next centuries till the halfway of the 20th century. That was the way with the Polish culture, but it was so powerful in unifying all the tradition, but it was the last one standing, but not in the terminology of battling one culture with another, but that was the thing with the culture emerging from the many other traditions as a unifying ability of its own. And it is really unique aspect of the cultures of the West, because regarding, let's say, the Franco or German cultures, or even the case of the Spain and its constant fight again between the Christian Spain culture, rather orthodox in its way, with Muslims and so on, were always instances where evolving meant battling one culture with another. In Poland, it was the case of evolving by gaining from other traditions and cultures and recreating its aspect. It is quite unique on the face of Europe, at least. It's not in the case of the world. And moving on to the case of the culture understood from the problem of the national identity and sovereignty. The case lies within the understanding of strict historical events that took place in the 18th century, so in the end period of the Enlightenment era. And these events are called in Polish history the partitions of Poland. So there was a time when the neighbors of Poland, the three most powerful neighbors of Poland, namely the Russian Empire, the Prussian Kingdom, and the Austrian great empire, decided secretly that they overtook the Polish government, the Polish parliament, and will force military Poles to divide their country and claim the territory for themselves. And three partitions of Poland took place after the Poland proclaimed its constitution, after the American Constitution, which was the first in the world, but the second democratic constitution was the Polish Constitution. And after Poles proclaimed the Constitution on the 3rd May, the Prussia, Russia, and Austria decided to depart the country and enslave the country for 123 years. So after the events of 1772, 1793, and 1795, finally, the Poland disappeared from the maps of Europe and the maps of the world for 120 years. And it's not existed in the sense of sovereign country and the sovereign nation. And mainly it was a problem and struggle of the Poles under the Prussian or Russian rule, how to preserve the national identity and struggle to regain freedom and sovereignty. And fun fact is that only one country in the world did not accept the fact of that overtaking the freedom and sovereignty of Poland, and that was Turkey. And it was in the culture thanks to our long-lasting tradition of military conflict. And for 123 years, wherever their parliament, so to say, the meetings with Sultan and its minister was taking place, they were always referring to Poland as the ambassador of Poland has not yet arrived. It was quite astonishing courtesy in the face of how easily the rest of the world accepted the fact that the Polish country and its nation just disappeared from the face of the world. And military speaking, regarding this event, Poles started a long-going tradition for national uprising, so to say, to regain the freedom and sovereignty by trying to overthrow the Russian and Prussian emperors at that time. And to give you just a brief idea how many conflicts, into how many conflicts Poles engage, you can see that since the 1768 till even the Warsaw Uprising during the Second World War, we started our own military tradition of fighting for freedom as the main value we cherished as a Polish nation was the value of freedom and our own sovereignty. And sadly speaking, most of these uprisings were lost with a great loss in the noble knights who took who were engaged in those battles. So we were faced with the problem that our uprisings were unsuccessful, that most of the knights and later on soldiers were dying out in those uprisings, and the Polish culture was faced with a dilemma. So how to save the identity and all these virtues and values we cherished as a Poles that constituted our identity throughout time, even for the generations who were already born in the country which was enslaved under the rule of Russians, Prussians, and Austrians, and how to provide the next generations with the ability to feel as the sovereign and free Poles under the rule of the other nations. And we invented that concept of creating art that was awakening the need for freedom, the need to be able to stand your ground and fight for your freedom for 123 years. And therefore, since the problem of departures of Poland began to exist in the late 18th century, most of art created in Poland was pointed out to manifest Polishness as a virtue, as a status in art. So, for example, because the case of Polish art, and mainly because, which is why I didn't want to make a presentation about Polish art per se and walk you through instances of Polish art, because when you think about great Polish artists, you're not talking about dozens, you're not even talking about hundreds of artists. We're talking about thousands of artists, and it's absolutely impossible to choose the iconographic visual material to present art in such a manner you could even briefly understood how many great artists were created or influenced by the Polish culture since the early Middle Ages till the 20th century. So, for example, Jacek Malczewski is one of the most famous Polish painters of the 19th century, and he's dealing with a problem of a national struggle quite literally in this painting, presenting all the soldiers and all the knights who took the possibility of acting military and fighting for freedom from the beginning of the Barges struggles of the 1780s, 1790s till the times he lived in, so let's say 1960s, 1970s, and 1980s. And that way of presenting the active heroes struggling for freedom and sovereignty of a nation became sort of a symbol for a heroic posture within the Polish characteristics. So almost every single generation that was brought up in Poland in the 19th and 20th century was brought and educated in such a manner that he or she were taught to always be ready to stand the ground and fight for the Polish freedom and sovereignty. That's the sort of idea of a Polish patriotism in act. But out of that were things, were art objects focusing maybe a little more on art per se, but still through the artistic story, because this painting is presenting the literal story of LNI, which was also the description, romantic description in literature, in an allegoric way, touching the problem of fighting for one's, of course, love, because it's a romantic period literature, but not only for love, but your own freedom and sovereignty to act as you will and to lose the oppression of, on one hand, of feelings, but on the other hand, of the other beings and people who try to identify how you should act as a solely free and human being. So there were art objects dealing with the problem of freedom in the manner how to learn for your own being, pushing that dispute over the freedom of a state and a nation, learn how you should learn to rule over yourself, your emotions, your acts, your will, and your life in a wider perspective, so you'd feel free and well governed by your rationalism and not only emotions. However, these emotions were the very basis for the Poles to act in such a manner that they were never stopped to fight for their freedom for over 123 years. And the case of the Polish society is, and the problem of unifying the nation was one of the main cases of the Romanticism art created in that moment. Because referring to the nation states at the time, you usually thought, or at least interpreting the rule of law, but the nation was created of the noble men and its families. You had the king, you had the higher nobleman, let's say the lords and so on, and the hierarchy of noblemen, but common folks were not considered a part of the nation. And what Poles understood very quickly under the pressure of that military activity, they persuade to overthrow the broad hands of rule of Russia and Austria in Poland, that they need to teach folks who are usually they identified themselves with the land they were caring about more than with the status and the feeling of the nation, national identity itself, that they have to persuade the folks that they are Polish folks, not only the folks of the place and all the villages they were brought in, they lived in, and most likely they were supposed to die in. So they took upon the theme of the problem of the identity itself, and the question of what the identity is and how personal identity should be explained. And is it the problem of the identity of a place you were in tradition you were born? And if that tradition, the place, the education you received identifies you as a man, and it will forever till the end of your days will be, or maybe it is the case of the higher instances. So let's say the religion itself, regarding you are Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, and so on. Or maybe it is a case of something greater, and you have that ability to identify yourself in a patriotic manner regarding your place of birth, your national identity as a set of values and virtues which are important in a society you were brought up, and you owe them your allegiance in the way you act not only for yourself but for the goodness of your nation, and maybe even something greater combined with it. So let's say, as for the Christian and Catholic tradition in Poland, you owe your allegiance to God Himself, and you wishfully think that if you are good in this utterly life on earth, you will be accepted in heavens and so on. But more importantly, you have to avoid evil decision and evil making throughout your entire life. So that was, in my opinion, one of the more interesting subjects brought to art history in Poland in the Romantic period, to deliberate upon what identity means and what identity means for Poles, and how to uh, persuade with this identity through the tough periods of being not a free and sovereign country, and how to incline that identity into folks who never before were treated in such a manner that they should identify themselves as Poles and so on. If that's the case of all the Poles. It's not specific to Poland, but specific to a system of the patriarchal structure in the medieval Europe, when you had a king, nobleman, and folks who were working on farms and in villages, so on. So to speak, the nobleman could create a culture on their own and at their will. And the another thing which evolved in the Polish history tradition is the aspect of cherishing the place of your origin in the manner of cherishing the lifestyle you know, and the nature you were surrounded by. So let's say it was a way of developing the love for your culture, and the love for your tradition, and the love for your country as understood through nature. So you find these many instances of paintings, sculptures, and some other art examples. I'm of course referring in the presentation to the paintings because they are the easiest way of presenting the iconography and iconology of the artworks in its entirety, but there were many instances presenting the same concept. It was not only an art created for art's sake, as it is nowadays, but that was the art to cherish that beloved understanding on what your homeland is. And but not only as these ideas I'm describing in that lecture from the theory of art are not specific to visual arts. That's the main case of understanding this, because I'm really sure that from the Asian perspective, you have to be familiar with Chopin music, because he's one of the most popular classical composers in the West, in the East. And if you are listening to Chopin music, most of his tracks resemble the same ideas and same themes and subjects as the ones I'm presenting to you in these lectures. So that's the case of this sorrow after he had to leave the country, the Poland, and live in Paris, and he was forbidden to come back, or he would be arrested under the Russian rule of law in Poland at that time. He's soaking after the Polish nature, the Polish tradition, the Polish culture, and its beauty. And you can hear it as in music as well as see it in the visual art objects. But regarding the art development itself, it's not only the case that Polish art was focused only on the problems of evolving the ways of fighting the occupants, or bringing forth the concepts of national identity and so on. We had a very successful art tradition of evolving the former traditions of the Western art and the current traditions at the time. As for example, you see the paintings by Olga Poznańska and Aleksander Gierymski, which are great examples of how the portrait painting evolved in the tradition of the Polish masters. Because when you refer to the tradition, let's say, of the 14th century and the beginning of the psychological concept of creating the picture, a portrait of a concrete person, you were trying to create a person in such an image that you could refer to your own experience as a viewer in front of such a portrait art object, but you were starting to bond with the person depicted in the painting. So that was this tradition of creating the psychological portrait as the artwork, which was bringing you to build the relation between the art person and the observer, and you could, communicate on the basis of contemplative investigation of this artworks, not only what this artwork contains, but to look upon your way of thinking and discovering your own thoughts and yourself. So this was the sort of a development of the tradition of the mirror of the ideas, how to perceive yourself in such an action that you are contemplating something way deeper than just a simplistic portrait in its manner. These are just two good examples of how that tradition developed. And another example of completely different philosophical concept of how art can be created are the paintings of Jan Matejko, which is one of the most famous Polish historical painter. But he's not only a battlist, he's not only a historical painter. Jan Matejko was a moralist who created his own way of presenting the most important images from Polish history. This is, of course, the Battle of Grunwald, which took place in 1410 and was the Polish victory over the Teutonian Order, and it is listed on that list of the 50 most important battles in human history, which changed the course of history. For example, we have the Battle of Vienna in 1683, when Poles again won with the Ottoman assault on the Vienna city, thus stopping the Islamic campaign over Europe. Or you have the Leonidas battle over with the Xerxes. So you have the battle in 410 BC at the Thermopyles, when the Greeks, Spartans, stopped the Persian Empire. And same goes with this battle, but artistically speaking, Matejko invented its own way to moralize the viewers in a wider historical context by presenting specific events from the history, but not only them, but also things that happened before and happened as consequences of those images. So to present the logical implication in history and specific policies that were undertaken by the people living at the time, and if we should follow such a course of political activity or not, or if we should maybe define our priorities and approach similar events in the future, being more aware than before. And to present you his way of thinking, this is the Union of Lublin. So the union that took place in 1569 by the rule of Stanislav August, King of Poland, presented in the in the center of this picture, holding cross upon which he was swearing the oath to the document of the Union of Lublin, and that was the union that unified the Kingdom of Poland and the Great Duchy of Lithuania. So it was a moment that created the first in the Europe and the biggest superpower at the time in 1569, the biggest country by territory and the biggest country by the cultural influence upon the rest of the Europe. And the Union of Lublin, the great Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, lasted till the departures of Poland, so till the 1771, when the first departure of Poland took place. And Matejko presents this as the key moment in Polish history by pointing to the watchtower outside the building of Lublin Castle, where the watch is pointing to the 12 a.m., so the noon of the history. He's presenting the great duchies of Lithuania, who then escaped the parliament session about the union, the Radisław Silver and Radisław the Red, and they escaped, led to the problem that the sovereign Lithuanian Commonwealth noblemen were not written into the coat of arms list, so they started a series of their own uprising against the Great Duchy of Lithuania and the Kingdom of Poland. We have the common folk who could not possibly be able to enter the parliament session within the same place with the king, as a reminder that we should have thought about nationalizing or bringing the national identity to folks much earlier in the history, so we could have that extra support from the state in all the conflicts that took place in the Polish area, because usually through the greatest wars in Polish history of war military campaigns, those who were fighting were the noblemen. If the common folks were able and let go to join the army, the outcomes of the battles against the Turkish Empire, the Russians, the Prussians, the Austrians, and finally the departures of Poland would possibly be absolutely different to the others. And almost every single person depicted in this picture is a historical picture, a historical person who had either influence to create that very moment and to make it possible for the union to be signed, or somehow symbolize or allegorize the effects of the union or possible losses that happened to the history because the union itself could be created in a better way. Fun fact is that the Polish-Lithuanian Union of Lublin in 1569 was the first union of such kind in the world, and Brits took the rule of law that was created for the Union of Lublin, and upon that rule of law we both invented, they created the Great Britain. So we invented Great Britain in Poland, legalistically speaking. Okay. Of course, there are other examples of art that are created and very specific in Poland art history. These are examples of the stained glass created by the Polish masters of Józef Mechhofer and Stanisław Wyspiański, referring to the Gothic stained glass traditions of the Western world, especially to the French one. But this is also the moment when the so-called young Europe period happens in the art history. So we had Renaissance, Baroque, and there is that visual idea how to interpret the epochs in art in the Western world. That, let's say, the Renaissance was the epoch of a mind, so the Baroque after it was the epoch of the spirit. Therefore, the Enlightenment, which happened afterwards, was the epoch of the mind. So the Romantic period happened after that, was the period of the spirit, and so on. The Classicist period was the period of the mind, and the period of the mind, which happened afterwards, which was the early Europe, so to say, the revival or the national identity, national cultures, heritage in separate nation states sprang through the Europe. And in Polish tradition, it was the exemplification of the subjects of the Christianity, the ancient tradition and ancient influence in the manner of philosophy and mythology of Greeks and Romans that was influencing the Polish barbarian history since the Middle Ages to the present days, being honestly be speaking, and the exemplification of how to answer the certain trends presented in the Western times, which was the rebirth of the Romantic epos and literature depicting the romantic stories of princesses, the goddesses, and the fairy tales. And in that period of a young Europe, the period of the great Polish decorative art has started. That's just the exemplification of Stanisław Wyspiański polychromies presented in the St. Francis of Assisi Church in Krakow. But since that the beginning of the 20th centuries, let's say the 1890s, 1920s, the Polish decorative art stream has sprung, and it lasts till the very day, because most of the Polish designers, which I did not include in the presentation, but whenever you type in Google or on any other internet search as Polish design, you can trace most of the design projects regarding the typography, regarding the polychromy, regarding the illustrations, trace themselves back to inspirations created in the beginning of the 20th century.
Mm.
And that was the moment where the design was not only the design for the houses, the tapestry, the furniture, the clothes, as you can see upon the picture presented in front of you, the styles of the clothes, and so on. And broadly speaking, the most Polish subject or themes or topics you can name in art would be it. But I think it is worth mentioning why all these things could happen and could evolve in the Polish artwork tradition. And mainly it was possible because Poles, since the beginning of the 14th century, had quite unique way of educating their own children. Of course, we are speaking about the noble families, but noble families had that great tradition that after the first steps of education in the country, conducted by monks and later on academias, young noble folks were sent to the countries on the west, so to France, to Italy, to Spain, to Netherlands, to learn, to travel, to experience other cultures, to experience talks by the great people and lecturers of the epoch, but they were also buying artworks. And Poland was one of the greatest collection states in the entire Europe, thanks to that, because that procedure lasted since the end of the 14th century till the 20th century. And the problem was that most of the collections which were brought back by the noblemen to Poland, so we're talking the antiques, the vases, the paintings, the sculptures, the miniatures, the tapestries, and so on, were the main objects which were pointed out to be stolen under every single campaign that took place in Poland. So the majority of them were stolen in the period of time 1655 till 1660, when we had something called the Swedish Flood, when the Swedish Navy invaded Poland for 5 years, and we were struggling to fight back. And most of what you can find in Swedish national museums and art galleries regarding the old art are the exhibits stolen from Poland. And the other massacre happened, of course, during the Second World War, when many art objects were stolen either by Germans or deep into the Soviet state. And it is estimated that only regarding what was stolen in that period of 1939-1945 by Nazi Germany and the Soviet Russia was worth more, economically speaking, but the general value of those instances was much higher than all of the art objects combined from the 5 biggest art museums and galleries in the world nowadays. So we are talking Prado Madrid, National Art Gallery in London, Louvre Paris, Hermitage in Moscow, and I don't remember what was the 5th gallery in that estimation, but thinking about the fact that your country lost the cultural heritage, which is worth more than the top 5 art galleries you can visit in the Western civilization world nowadays, is quite astonishing to understand how expanded was the Polish culture sensitivity to gather such great collections. And that great collections, which were gathered by Poles for the centuries, served the purpose of creating Polish museums in the 19th century, in the beginning of the 19th century, by the presence of Izabela z Flemingów-Czartoryska, who bought the castle you can see in the partial picture on the right, in Gołuchów Castle, and who created a park near the Puławy in the Lubelski voivodeship in Poland, where she had that Gothic house and this castle in Gołuchów to present the art objects from Italy, from the ancient Rome, from ancient Greek, and from the French and the Netherlands. And she created the Sibylla temple to present the memorabilia from all the uprisings that took place since the 1794, the Kościuszko uprising, till her times. So the museums in Poland sprang from the necessity to educate people about the Western roots, or the Polish roots in the Western civilization, and presenting all the heritage from Greece, Roman, France, Gothic, Renaissance, Italy, and so on till the very times, and to elevate that quest to embrace the national identity and memorabilia from the actions that took place afterwards. And that even though that museum concept started in the 19th century, the idea to preserve art for the good of nation is way older, because the Stanisław Augustus, the King of Poland, who signed the Union of Lublin, and who bought the collection of arrases which appeared in the beginning of this presentation, and you can see some of them in the space of the throne room at the Wawel Castle in Krakow. I believe he bought 170 of them, and 138 of them survived to the present day. And these arrases were extremely expensive, were specially designed and created for him in the 16th century. And it took about 30 years to complete all those arrases in Belgium. I believe it was in Brussels, in Belgium, where they were created. It was the solely place in the world which was specialized in creating this arrases as this absolutely magnificent tapestry with the silver and golden threads imprinted on them, presents the history of the Old Testament. So the creation of a man, the creation, the escape from the Eden, the history of the Babel Tower, the story of Noah, and the imaginative concepts of how the flora and fauna of the Eden, so the garden of creation, might have looked like, and perhaps understood as the vision of the godly heaven. In his will, Stanislav August insisted that all the arrases that he had and he brought to the castle in Krakow will be the deposit for the nation of Poland. So he did not precise how, but he wanted them to be presented as the goodness of the nation, and that every single individual of the time, including the common citizens of the cities, would be given the chance to visit them, to watch them, to experience them, and to enrich himself by experiencing all these magnificent tapestries understood as the artworks. So that concept of creating a great presentation of art for the good of the nation in Poland rose into the common senses in the 16th century, which is very early as compared to what was happening in the Europe at that time. And specifically, what might be interesting for you is that Poles also had that moment for Eastern art, which is especially known in the person of Felix Manga-Jasieński, who gathered a collection of more than 15,000 exhibits, and of that number, 7,000 of the exhibits were from Far East, and from Japan, he gathered 4,600 woodcuts of Hokusai, Hirosage, Kiniyosho, Utamaro, if I'm pronouncing it correctly.
Yeah, fine.
And many military, small collection of paintings, sculptures, ceramics, textiles, lacquers, and enamel ware bronzes, and much more, which can be seen because that collection survived. And we created a special museum of Japanese art in Krakow dedicated to Felix Manga-Jasieński. So the museum is called the Manga Museum and has that collection, that exhibit that presents changing collections from his 7,000 objects of the Japanese art and a few other exhibition gallery expositions where the modern contemporary art is presented. But as I said earlier, much of those great collections which were gathered by noblemen of Poland was lost. The estimations for that great loss during the Second World War ranges due to the estimation between 30 and 60 billion US dollars, and it is almost impossible to create a list of a loss for the previous stolen objects prior to the 18th century. But till nowadays, the instances occur where art historians and art curators visiting museums worldwide, even in Asia and the United States or the Southern America, find the Polish artworks in the museums. And sometimes it is possible for the Ministry of Culture in Poland and the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of the countries of origin where those art objects were found to bring back them to Poland, but it is really hard. And most of those art objects, which we can name, as for example, the painting of the Titian young man, which was stolen from Izabela Czartoryska, which we know that was in the Poland till the 1944, disappeared in the private hands and most likely is kept secure in some sort of private gallery and will never see the light of the day. So to conclude this rather chaotic lecture of the theory of art in Poland, Polishness, subjects in art, pragmatic question, which I think might be interesting for those of you who decide to visit Poland, is a question how to tour Poland and how to experience art. Because from my perspective, in many instances where you move around Europe, you are facing the tour guides, the the tour guidebooks and the internet websites, which point you to the direction of the exhibit and monuments which are most popular, but are, in my opinion, absolutely not the most important ones. So I would seek on my journey to Europe, not only to Poland, but museum and art galleries as well as the sacred spaces. But not but should not include only the churches, but also the synagogues, the Orthodox churches, and all the sacred places in Europe, because in many instances, the artworks you can experience in those places are of far better quality than what you can see in art galleries and art museums. And usually you can do it for free. So it is just a matter of a good research you should foresee before going to Europe. And I would encourage you to always look and pay attention for the deeper iconographic and ecological and historical context of the art, especially with that subtle difference about what was art in regarding the historical concept as information and as the idea. Because I did not mention it, Ariel, and I think this is the most important thing in that subtle difference is that sometimes to experience art, you don't have to understand anything, and it influences you as a human being because we as human beings, I believe, have that sensibility that we curve to create art and we curve to experience art because we curve to create it. And we don't have to understand it. And we can contemplate it in a very emotional manner. But I do believe that to name something art, at least in that Western culture tradition circle, you have to have that information and experience. And regarding information, sometimes you may have to have the deeper knowledge by art historians who decoded that artwork, explaining why these things, why these colors, why those pigments, why those objects, why such an arrangement, what does it mean, what's the iconography behind it. But to find and understand that idea, I don't think you have to have such a deeper knowledge about the information. And paradoxically, to understand the information might be harder than to understand the idea of the art. But I would risk the statement that if you are dealing with an art object, which is really art, not just a decorative object, because art, in our understanding in art theory of the West, is not the same as the decoration. So when you are referring to an art object, it has to have that idea. And even when you came from the different tradition to the culture of the West and the Western tradition, you should be able, as a human being, to find that idea, to contemplate on that idea, and to at least find how you feel about it and how you can argue with it, or how you can deal with it, how you can accept it, or how you can deny it. As it's part of ideas that's different for other cultural circles. And to do so, to prepare yourself for the further touring in Poland, or the Europe, or I believe the America as well, because it was influenced mostly because of European tradition. You have to look for the deeper understanding in the person of tour guides and the guidebooks and the websites, which point you to understanding the wider concept about the artworks itself and the creation of the artwork, like understood, like it was created between this year and that year, but by that person who lived here, moved there, created this artwork here, and then moved away from it. Just do not be afraid of asking further and more complicated questions about the context. And the best tip is to check the history of the cities and the monuments in the internet for your own sake, even if you are using such simplistic tools as Wikipedia and so on. But it is a good idea to switch languages in the Wikipedia. And for example, if you are trying to visit Poland and you are searching in Japanese or in English a certain monument or a city you are planning on visit, switch language to Polish, for example, just copy the text, and paste it to even to Google Translator to English, or maybe to Japanese if it's possible, to translate it, and look for historical and ideological explanations of what's worth seeing, and maybe how you should approach the experience of visiting and understanding the reality around you while touring yourself through the Western culture, Western cities, and Western tradition. And thank you. That would be it.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Tarnas. That was amazing. I think you should have a bit rest, but I would like to ask some question and also comment. Is it possible?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, it was great. Thank you so much. Yeah. Yeah, you gave me a lot of deeper knowledge, and it could focus to get to know the details of the visual art. But even though the visual art, we still have so many things that we don't even notice, especially when we go to museums. There are tons of their artworks that we have time limited. But when you explain such hidden message, or the concept of the artist, or the why it happened in this history in that moment, this was amazing to know.
Yes,
Also,
because
plus,
nowadays I forgot about that modern and contemporary concept. So maybe a quick side note to that. I skipped the modern and contemporary presentation of the artworks because I do believe nothing specific Polish was created in that time. And I don't mean by that they are no great Polish artists in the modern times. So let's say between 1890s and 1939, the Second World War, and the contemporary time, which we date from the 1945, the end of the Second World War, till the present time, because there are great artists, there are great objects that are being created, but they are either a part of the traditions which are way older than their lives and their exhibits, or what they do create corresponds more than Polish and Polishness in art as a theme and a subject, and information and idea, with the worldwide idea of what to do with the contemporary art. And it may sound disturbing because I'm working in the Center for Contemporary Art, but my main job there is to demystifying what is art and what art is not and should not be. And I do believe that what we consider art nowadays, generally speaking, in the Western, or maybe the Anglosphere, which is the term for both the Americas, and the Europe, and the presence of the internet in the English language based internet, are the concepts of art referring to various political ideologies. And I believe the communism is or the neo-communism, neo-Marxism concept are the most common ones. And these objects which serve a background to these ideological structures are not really art objects, in my opinion, but really rather sophisticated aesthetically instances of social engineering, and the rest is just decorative things, like the art deco of the internet, art deco of the lifestyle, and so on. Because regarding brutalism in architecture and minimalism in modern architecture and so on, you are not really interested in information and idea and the concept of art itself, but you are just looking as the visual instance of the object, and you're asking yourself a question: do you like it or not? And if you don't like it, you move just from one style, from modernism to brutalism, or from brutalism, let's say, to Scandinavian eclecticism, and so on. And these things are of different origin about the art itself, I believe. And I wanted to present you with the active know-how how to approach art, looking on the art of past millennia, because I do find that the most common emotion that happens to the viewers in the contemporary or modern art galleries or museum is confusion, and that they absolutely have no idea what they are looking for, and they don't know how to approach art And then you have that artwork society, which tells you that you should cherish things because you should, or you shouldn't because, let's say, they don't like the artist or his artworks, and that's the basis on which you should appoint your aesthetic judgment. But none of this statement is based on the logic of the argument that this artwork presents something or it does not present something. It's more of the political and or and emotional judgment than the aesthetic and intellectual rational judgment of nowadays. However, you can all find the contemporary artworks which refer to the traditions of the great art and pursue to look in the new ways of visual composition, new subjects for art, and dig deep into the concept of what art is nowadays, of course.
Yeah, according to this topic, that for the viewers or the people who study art, I think important thing is that you said a few times about the keyword, the manner. I took this the word manner as like to give self-educational influence, something like that. How would you specifically define this the word manner?
I would refer that to the paranetic function of the artworks. So the idea to confront the viewer with the art objects, we refer not only to the viewer of the epoch from which the art object was created, but to all the next generations foregoing the creation of that art object. The manner of understanding that art is to understand not the art objects itself, but the goal should be to understand not even the mind of the creator and what he wanted to present you through that object and through that vast and complicated iconography and iconology presented visually in the aesthetics of that object, but to ask yourself why it was of importance that he wanted to show that to his generation and possibly to the generations coming afterwards. And for me, that manner of understanding art and educating through art is to look for the ideas that build the civilization itself. And not only the civilization of, generally speaking, the Western civilization, but as the old instances of the national civilization and national identities in the countries through the time, right? And what was of such an importance regarding values and values put to act, so virtues, that it was meant for them to be implemented in that art objects so they can last in time for the next generation. Because regarding the knowledge of art, even if you are not only referring to architectural objects, which obviously were creating upon long periods of time, so like Gothic cathedrals, which were the models of the universe understood from the cosmic universe, understood from the perspective of the Catholic theology, the tapestries knitted with the silk collected by many years, with the threads from silver and gold, and implemented with the jewels and so on, and almost every single evidence of the art objects throughout the old times was created with such an effort that it would be a waste of time to present ideas not worth sharing. So that manner of educating for art for me is to ask yourself upon the meaning of ideas that were of such an importance that people wanted them to prolongate their own lives. Because there's that Latin saying ars longa vita brevis, meaning that art lives a long life while the humans live a very short life comparing to the art and history itself.
Great, thank you. Then nowadays for the contemporary art, it seems less expression about the unity and the freedom that you are talking often about the artworks in the past century, but in 21st century for now, the artworks has less sense about these two words. But what would you think about it? If you
Well,
want.
I think the main problem is that we, in the certain moment of time, especially regarding the facts, the historical facts of the Second World War, we stopped teaching the humanities because after the Second World War, everybody was so upset that such bad things happened that we sink into that state of mind when we were flooding in the idea that humanity is in crisis and how to repair that crisis of the humanity itself. So whatever was constituting the humanity of human beings was not enough because the Second World War happened. And upon that idea, instead of going back in history and looking at your roots of your civilization, most of the trends, especially in Western academias, gave up on classical teaching in the humanities. So the societies and the next generation started losing connection with the mythology, the history, the literature, the poetics, and art history understanding, to the moment where people, after losing the understanding to read culture and read art, started losing their national identity and their social identity to the local places. Because nowadays, asking the common folks in Europe about history of their place, which they were, let's say, born into 30 years ago. So let's say we are dealing with a 30-year-old person, which is educated because, let's say, he or she finished the university courses. And most often, those people absolutely have no idea about the history of their birth origin place or their national history or basic understanding upon the art or the ideas of values of virtues which created the society, which made possible for them to exist to begin with. And I would say that the so-called contemporary art is mainly influenced by the globalists, social political trends nowadays, and that things presented in art nowadays are more concerned with the global problems than with the idea of bringing up the national identity nowadays. So let's say we have the problem of the climate change, we have the problem of the sexual minorities and so on. We have the problem of the creating the unified, the spiritual ground for human development, but it is absolutely not the same as the concern of a religion. And we have the problem of the economical background and economical possibilities of the common earth citizen and how the society of globalists perceive his future on the planet earth rather than focusing on how to bring forth the national identity and national influences. And I believe that trends are similar in the United States and similar in Europe, mainly due to the political activities that are taking upon the European Union and the Congress of the United States of America nowadays. But what's more intriguing is the fact that when we are dealing with the art instances that try to persuade that art which wants to present something and art that wants to point out to some national identities, because I believe that living in a technocratic era, we are facing the problem outside of that political concept of globalization struggles, that nowadays people are tending to involve themselves too much into the virtual reality and they are losing connection with the real world. And mainly, I believe personally, it is because especially the young generation is losing its connection to who they are outside of the virtual realm. And let's say the Polish artist who persuades in his own artworks the quest to bring forth the idea of bringing again back the personal identification in real world, in real history and national identity is Ignacy Czwartos. We dedicated to him the last issue of our thematic magazine, of the Obieg magazine, which I strongly recommend you to read, because when you visit the www.obieg.pl website, on the right side in the menu you can find the English section, and in the English section you can find the issues of our magazine translated to English, at least the ones from the 24th issue, from the 16th to 24th issue, created under my editorialship, because the columns are not always translated to English. And Ignacy Czwartos was selected to represent Poland on the Venice Biennale, which is currently taking place in the Venice as we speak, on the 6th of May. And after he was selected by a committee of art historians, curators, and museum directors, and accepted by the Minister of Culture, the parliamentary elections in Poland took place in the October last year, and the next Minister of Culture decided that he is not bringing anything good to the table, and his art pointing to national identity, to history of Poland, especially history of Poland national identity in the times of the Second World War, because that cruelty and struggle for sovereignty and freedom in the Second World War, and the soldiers who devoted themselves and were brutally murdered by the Germans and Russians throughout the Second World War are main topics of his paintings. He was censored to go to Venice, and the fact that he won an independent competition was denied. The Polish culture minister sent Ukrainian artists as official Polish artists to the Venice Biennale, but we managed to create him an independent exhibition 18 meters from the Polish pavilion in the Venice. But the whole world press, because there were many instances of press releases regarding that situation, were quite shocked that we are now in the times where not only these trends of old authors, old art understanding are not only welcomed and are not propagated, but are being censored. So we are in a really weird spot nowadays.
Great. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. It's a bit chaos that the political, this the globalism and the nationalism, and also the history and the art, the art of the now about this. For example, 18th century Poland was even not in the map for 123 years old, and so many things were fucked up. And now then the national ideology coming up, but then things are totally broken by political stuff and so on. Then I just wonder the balance between one and the two. This is the quite strange things. I would like to ask you how should the sake of the art should be nowadays in this balance? It's a
Well,
tough
I
question.
believe art will never be conquered by any ideology. Definitely, of course, there are art instances were influenced by ideology, and we can observe such trends in the various moments of art history and development of the civilization in many places in the world. But I personally believe that if prehistorical man could create art objects like 40,000 BC, the art will be fine. I'm just worried about the condition of the human being in this struggle, because if we lose art, even if the old objects will be gone, we will lose the art galleries, art museums, art education. If we lose the sense why we should watch good movies, read good literature, to seek and crave for great poetry, and so on. If we lose that need to look for deeper meaning and deeper sense, and we lose that cognitive and contemplative need to explore the world and ourselves, I think we will erase that human particle, which is deep down buried in our existence. And I believe that the particle is necessary for our happy and successful well-being in this world. Because I believe that moving aside the tradition in which the concrete human being was brought up to, either somebody is Christian, Catholic, Orthodox, Jewish, Buddhist, maybe some other religion, if he was brought up in Asia, Africa, in the America, or in Europe, I believe that that condition to explore the world and ourselves and look for deeper meanings, deeper ideas, deeper virtues and values is uniformal and absolute, and you cannot erase that. And um, and I'm aware that denying art itself, thus denying the culture in the wider sense, may become a danger for that humanity inside the human beings more than to art itself. But it is more the problem of relating to understanding human beings and humanism in human being than the art itself.
Yeah, true. Yeah, art is not like pencil or the cup, for example, but more like walk or sleep or something, your daily habit, right? So that
Yeah,
it shouldn't be disappeared. But thing is that the people in the art create the object and it's gonna be stolen by somebody or the broken or the budget to hold is less sometime. So that's the struggle. So that I would think like it it cannot be it's okay if it's not art, but we should be arty, like creative, like
yeah.
yeah. Then it would stay longer, but that's a question of me. Right. Thank you. By the way,リュウタさん、何かもし質問とか何かご感想などがあれば僕伝えます。
本当ですか？なんかちょっとパラパラっと日本語で喋ってもいいですか？
もちろんもちろん。
なんかすごい面白かったなと思いました。で、なんかすごい今の大成さんの質問もなんとなく聞いていて、なんかすごい中間の大事さを感じました。なんか常に
うん。
こう多元主義っていうか、いろんな原理があって、その中の間にいるみたいなことが
う
大事なの
ん。
かな。すごい感想です。ちょっと伝えて
Yeah, the comment is that it was really interesting, and he thinks it's important that the something that we are in kind of middle, or the in the if there are gray zone, we are in the gray zone, like from not only black and white like dualism, but also
Yeah.
we have so many gradations, and that's the one important thing, that we stay there and we keep the importance on these areas. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm. It's not always white and black. All right.
Thank you very
And
much.
yeah, what you spoke is
Thank you.
totally different from this Asian, Japanese art history, and also yeah, political history is also totally different. Wow, that's nice shock that we heard from you. It's such a professional speech that you created, and it's totally a masterpiece. Thank you so much for this.
Thank you very much. It was a pleasure to create such a lecture, even though I do believe it was way more chaotic than it could be. but
Yes.
but I believe it also provides that idea that art is really complex, and sometimes art instances and historical, political, ideological, informational courses you're trying to learn are very chaotic themselves, and we shouldn't be afraid of that chaotism, but we should focus on the main points and the bright goals, and we'll eventually get to the point where we want to be.
Yeah, right. OK、ありがとうございます。じゃあ、りゅうたさん、そろそろ終わりにしていきましょうか。
はい、じゃあ本日はこれで終了したいと思います。授業の最後にいろんな質問があると思うので、またタルナスさんに聞いてみてください。はい、ということで、同じさん、今日もありがとうございました。
ありがとうございました。Thank you so much, Mr. Tarnas. We're happy
So
to
much,
hear
Mr.
that.
Tarnas.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. バイバイ。